The galaxy was filled with countless stars, yet many of them had fallen into silence. The reason was the Vayrek Empire, a powerful alien force that had been spreading across the stars for centuries. They were known for their discipline, their advanced ships, and their ability to crush resistance with cold precision. Whenever their fleets arrived in a system, the story was always the same. The defenders would fight bravely, but in the end, their fleets would burn, their cities would fall, and their people would be forced to kneel or vanish. Everywhere across the galaxy, defeat had become normal. Whole civilizations had once dreamed of freedom and pride, but after facing the Vayrek, those dreams turned into memories. Even the Alliance of Free Worlds, a group of species who had come together to resist, found themselves unable to match the Empire's strength. Their fleets were smaller. Their technology was older. Their leaders argued among themselves while the Vayrek acted with unity. The war stretched on year after year, and with every passing season, the balance grew darker. On one world after another, the story repeated itself. An alliance fleet would try to defend a planet. For a short time, hope would flicker. Then the Vayrek armadas would arrive, moving in perfect formation, each ship operating like part of a single living machine. The defenders would be overwhelmed. Commanders knew the pattern so well that they began to predict the hour of their own loss before the battle even began. In time, despair spread faster than any enemy fleet. People whispered that no one could ever stop the Vayrek. They were too organized, too advanced, too merciless. The Alliance could delay defeat, but they could never escape it. Some leaders secretly considered surrender as the only path left, while others still fought on because they refused to abandon their worlds. But even their courage could not change the outcome. The war had reached the point where even victories felt hollow. Sometimes, an Alliance fleet managed to win a battle, destroying a squadron or saving a colony. Yet these moments did not matter in the long run. The Vayrek simply returned in greater numbers, and the cycle continued. It felt as though the galaxy was locked inside a storm that would never end. Among the soldiers of the Alliance, there was a heavy silence whenever they prepared for battle. They no longer believed they could win. They only fought because it was their duty, or because surrender would bring shame. Some fought to protect their families, others because there was no other choice. Hope was the one resource that was running out faster than fuel or weapons. In those days, stories began to spread across the Alliance fleet about a strange new force that had recently joined the war. The stories came in fragments, like sparks carried by the wind. Some spoke of soldiers who fought with reckless courage, others of small ships that managed to break through impossible defenses. Many dismissed these tales as rumors born from desperation. After all, the Alliance had seen too many so-called miracles vanish into smoke. But still, the whispers grew louder. This new force was said to come from a distant and forgotten corner of the stars. They were not part of any ancient empire. They had no fleets of legendary design. They had no long history in the galaxy's records. In fact, they had only recently stepped into the wider stage of the stars. At first glance, they seemed small and fragile compared to the great powers. They had fewer colonies, less technology, and less experience. No one understood why they would even choose to join the war against the Vayrek when so many stronger civilizations had already fallen. It seemed foolish, almost hopeless. Yet the reports continued. Wherever these newcomers appeared, the battle seemed to change. Instead of retreat, there was stubborn advance. Instead of silence, there were sudden victories. Entire squadrons of the Vayrek had been delayed by their attacks. Supply lines had been disrupted. Most surprising of all, these newcomers had survived battles where no other force would have endured. To the Alliance Council, these reports were confusing. Some leaders wanted to ignore them, believing it was only a trick of rumor. Others felt curious, even hopeful, though they did not wish to admit it. But to the soldiers on the front lines, the news felt different. Even if the stories were exaggerated, they carried something powerful, the idea that maybe, just maybe, defeat was not the only ending. It was in this atmosphere of despair and fading hope that humanity appeared on the stage of the galactic war. No one yet understood what kind of species they were, or why they fought the way they did. All that was certain was this: the war that had seemed endless, the storm that had swept across the stars without resistance, was about to face something it had never known before. For the first time in years, the galaxy did not only speak of loss. It began to whisper another word: possibility. When the Alliance first met humanity, they did not know what to expect. The Council of Worlds had grown used to new species appearing now and then, but most of them were weak or unprepared for the war. Humanity came from a distant blue world called Earth, a place that was unknown in most records. At first, the other species saw them as too small to matter. Their ships were modest, their technology simple compared to the great powers, and their numbers seemed too few. Many wondered why they had even chosen to step into a war that older civilizations were already losing. The first official contact happened during the defense of a mining colony on the edge of Alliance space. A fleet of Vayrek destroyers appeared in the system, moving with their usual cold precision. The Alliance forces were outnumbered and already preparing to retreat. But before they could, a handful of unfamiliar ships arrived from hyperspace. They were human vessels, smaller than the sleek designs of the Alliance, but they came forward without hesitation. The commanders of the Alliance expected the newcomers to keep their distance, perhaps to observe or to retreat when they realized the danger. Instead, the humans rushed directly at the Vayrek formation. Their ships did not hold back, even though they were clearly weaker in size and firepower. They struck with such speed and aggression that the enemy formation broke for the first time in years. The Vayrek were known for never losing control in battle, but against these strange attackers, their lines wavered. The Alliance officers watched in shock. Human pilots did not fight like others. Where most species valued careful maneuvers and safety of their fleets, humans seemed willing to gamble everything. They pushed their ships to the limit, flying through enemy fire, taking risks that seemed impossible. Even when their hulls burned and systems failed, they continued forward as if retreat was not an option. By the time the Vayrek pulled back, several human ships were badly damaged, but not a single one had abandoned the fight. The mining colony was saved that day, though no one truly understood how. The defenders spoke of the humans with awe and confusion. It was the first time in a long while that the Vayrek had been forced to retreat from a small battle. To the citizens of the colony, it was nothing short of a miracle. After this first encounter, the Alliance Council demanded to learn more about humanity. Delegates were sent to speak with human leaders, and the meetings left a strong impression. Humans were polite enough, but there was a sharpness in their eyes, a kind of focus that was difficult to describe. They did not speak as if they expected defeat, nor did they treat the Vayrek as an unstoppable giant. Instead, they spoke as if war was something they understood deeply, something that was not new to them. Many Alliance leaders were unsettled by this. Most species fought wars only in rare times of history. For them, violence was a dark memory or an event to be avoided. But humanity carried stories of endless struggles on their own world. They spoke of conflicts that lasted for centuries, of battles fought with nothing but determination, of victories won even when everything seemed lost. To them, war was not a strange or impossible thing. It was something they had grown from. On the battlefield, this truth became even clearer. Human soldiers began to serve alongside Alliance troops. At first, their numbers were small, but wherever they appeared, the nature of the fight seemed to change. In one engagement, a squad of human Marines held a defensive line far longer than anyone believed possible. They fought with a stubbornness that ignored fear. Even when surrounded, they refused to surrender. In another battle, a group of human pilots carried out an attack run through a Vayrek fleet, destroying supply ships at the cost of their own safety. No one had ever seen such bold tactics before. The Alliance began to learn something important. Humanity did not fight with superior weapons or numbers. They fought with willpower. Where others measured battles by logic and chance, humans fought as though victory could be forced into existence if they simply refused to quit. This confused their allies and frightened their enemies. The Vayrek themselves gave humanity their first nickname. After facing human soldiers in ground combat, they began to call them shadows. The reason was simple: once humans entered a battlefield, they did not leave until the enemy broke. They moved in small units, striking where they were least expected, and they seemed to endure wounds or hardships that would have ended others. The Vayrek, who prided themselves on order and control, found these opponents unpredictable and dangerous. At the same time, humanity began to earn respect among the Alliance. Soldiers who had once believed every battle was hopeless now looked at their human allies with cautious hope. They had seen the impossible happen with their own eyes. Some commanders even admitted that without the humans, they would have abandoned positions long before. Still, not everyone trusted them. Some leaders feared that humanity's reckless nature would lead to disaster. Others worried that humans were too ruthless, too willing to sacrifice themselves. But on the front lines, those doubts mattered little. What mattered was survival, and humanity seemed to bring a spark of it wherever they went. Slowly, the whispers spread further. Perhaps this strange new species could do what no one else had managed. Perhaps they could stand against the Vayrek in ways the galaxy had never seen before. For the first time, the Alliance did not feel alone. For the first time, the Vayrek faced an enemy they could not easily predict. Humanity had entered the war, and though they were small and new to the stars, they carried with them a force greater than numbers or weapons. They carried the refusal to accept defeat. And in a galaxy drowning in despair, that refusal was more powerful than anyone yet realized. As the war went on, the galaxy began to notice a strange pattern. Wherever human soldiers fought, the battles never followed the usual rules. The Vayrek had spent centuries perfecting their war strategies. They believed in order, discipline, and complete control. But against humanity, their perfect lines and precise maneuvers began to break apart. The reputation of the humans grew quickly. In the beginning, many thought of them as reckless newcomers, but soon their enemies started to whisper new names for them. The Vayrek called them shadows, because no matter how many times they tried to trap them, the humans always seemed to slip through, striking where no one expected. To the Alliance, they became a force of hope, a reminder that the war could still change. What made the humans different was not their weapons. Their rifles, ships, and armor were often simpler than those of their allies. It was not their numbers either, for they had fewer soldiers than most species. The difference was their way of thinking. Humanity fought with creativity, and they accepted risks that no one else dared. In one famous battle on a frozen moon, the Alliance planned to hold a defensive line against a much larger Vayrek army. The plan was careful and logical, but the numbers showed that the defenders would fall within hours. While the council debated retreat, the human commander refused. Instead of waiting for the Vayrek to crush them, human soldiers disappeared into the icy wasteland. For 2 days, the enemy tried to advance, only to be ambushed again and again. Supply trucks exploded. Communications went silent. Soldiers vanished in the snow. By the time the main Vayrek army reached the defensive line, they were already weakened and confused. Against all predictions, the defenders held their ground. Stories like this spread across the galaxy. Human soldiers moved in small groups, but their impact was far greater than their numbers. They struck supply routes, destroyed command posts, and even infiltrated enemy ships. For the first time in generations, the Vayrek began to experience doubt. Their commanders had always been certain of victory, but now they were forced to admit that these strange newcomers could not be predicted. The Alliance soldiers who fought beside the humans began to notice another truth. Humans did not fight only with weapons, they fought with emotion. When they saw allies fall, they did not retreat in fear, they pressed forward harder. They carried the weight of every destroyed world on their shoulders, and it gave them a determination that felt unbreakable. Where other soldiers fought for duty, humans fought as if the war was personal. There was another reason they earned respect. Humans refused to leave anyone behind. In battle after battle, they risked their own lives to rescue allies. Many stories told of human squads running back into fire to save wounded comrades from other species. At first, some commanders thought this was foolish, a waste of resources. But soon, soldiers realized that this loyalty made the humans stronger. Everyone who fought beside them knew that the humans would never abandon them, and that trust built unity in the darkest moments. The Vayrek, who relied on strict obedience and fear, could not understand this. To them, soldiers were tools. To humans, soldiers were family. That bond gave them strength that numbers and machines could not match. Over time, the reputation of humanity grew into something larger than simple respect. Some began to fear them, even among allies. The humans fought with such intensity that their methods sometimes looked ruthless. They would cut off supply lines even if it meant entire enemy divisions starved. They would destroy bridges and bases even if it trapped thousands of Vayrek soldiers with no way to retreat. To the galaxy, such actions felt merciless, but to the humans, it was necessary. They had learned through their own history that war demanded hard choices, and hesitation could mean total defeat. This ruthless edge became part of their legend. Allies told stories of human squads who fought until their last breath rather than surrender. Vayrek commanders warned their soldiers never to underestimate them, for even a small group of humans could tear apart a larger force if given the chance. Yet within this image of cold determination, there was another side. The same soldiers who fought with such fire were also the ones who shared food with starving civilians, who helped rebuild villages after battles, who treated allies with respect no matter their species. It was as if humans carried two faces into the war, one for the enemy and one for their friends. To the Vayrek, they were shadows, ruthless and unstoppable. To the Alliance, they were protectors who brought light in dark times. As more battles passed, the galaxy realized something powerful. Humanity was not simply another species in the Alliance. They were changing the very nature of the war. The Vayrek were no longer fighting an alliance that defended and retreated. They were fighting an alliance that attacked, that adapted, that refused to break. And at the heart of that change were the human soldiers, the ones who carried a reputation that grew with every battle. For the first time, the Vayrek felt the weight of fear pressing back against them. They had always believed victory was certain, but now, when commanders spoke of humans, their voices carried unease. The galaxy had begun to understand a truth that the Vayrek were only just learning. Humanity was not here to delay defeat. Humanity was here to turn the impossible into reality. And with every battle, with every story, that reality grew stronger. The war had been long, but the darkest moment arrived when the Vayrek prepared their greatest attack. For years they had pressed forward, crushing one world after another. Now they gathered their largest fleet yet, aiming directly at the core systems of the Alliance. If those worlds fell, the resistance would be broken forever. The Council of Worlds studied the numbers and felt despair. The Vayrek fleet outnumbered them 10-1. Their ships carried more firepower, their soldiers were rested, and their supply lines stretched deep across conquered space. Every calculation ended the same way: defeat was certain. Inside the council chambers, voices rose in anger and fear. Some leaders demanded that the Alliance surrender before more lives were lost. Others argued that they must fight to the last breath, even if it meant total destruction. Hope was slipping away, and unity was breaking apart. The Vayrek knew this too. They had chosen this attack not only to win the war but to crush the spirit of their enemies completely. During these debates, the human delegation remained silent for a long time. They listened as the older civilizations argued, each one too afraid to admit what they truly felt. At last, a human commander named Ryan stood and spoke. His words were calm, but his tone carried a strength that filled the chamber. He said the war was not over, and that surrender was not an option. The council looked at him in disbelief. Did he not see the numbers? Did he not understand the power of the Varek fleet? But Ryan continued. He explained that humans did not measure battles only by numbers. Victory, he said, did not always come from having more ships or stronger weapons. Sometimes it came from striking where the enemy least expected, from cutting their strength at the root instead of facing them head-on. The human plan was unlike anything the Alliance had ever heard. Instead of preparing to defend the core worlds directly, they suggested a dangerous counterattack. The Varek war machine was strong because of its endless supply lines. Their fleets stretched across half the galaxy, but they were fed by huge hub stations where fuel, weapons, and food were gathered before being sent to the front. If those hubs were destroyed, the enemy fleets would be left weak and scattered. At first, the council rejected the idea. It was madness, they said. No one could strike so deep into enemy territory. The risks were too great, and the chance of success too small. But the humans did not back down. They reminded the council of every battle the Varek had won, battles where the defenders had followed logic and reason only to be crushed. If they fought the Varek on their terms, defeat was already certain. The only way forward was to change the rules of the war. The debate lasted for hours. Some leaders refused to trust humanity's reckless thinking. Others began to wonder if this was the only path left. Slowly, the voices shifted. In the end, the council agreed, not because they believed fully in the plan, but because they had no other choice. The responsibility of carrying out the plan fell heavily on the humans. They volunteered their fleets without hesitation. Their soldiers prepared without complaint. To them, the danger was real, but fear was not enough to stop them. They had come into this war knowing the enemy was stronger, yet they had already shown that strength alone did not decide everything. When news of the plan spread through the Alliance fleets, reactions were mixed. Some soldiers called the humans brave. Others called them reckless. Many simply prayed it would work, for they knew the core worlds could not survive a direct attack. Still, among the human troops, there was no hesitation. They spoke of their mission as if it was already written, as if victory could be forced into reality by sheer will. As preparations began, the Varek advanced closer and closer. Their fleets moved like a storm across the stars, swallowing systems without slowing. The Alliance scrambled to delay them, but nothing could truly stop their march. Every hour lost meant the enemy grew nearer to the heart of the Alliance. Yet far behind enemy lines, in hidden bases and secret docks, the human forces gathered. Their ships were smaller, their numbers fewer, but they carried determination sharper than any blade. Commanders studied maps of Varek supply hubs, marking weak points, planning daring routes through guarded space. Pilots trained for missions that gave them only the smallest chance of return. Ground soldiers prepared for strikes that would leave them cut off and surrounded. The humans accepted these risks, not because they wished for sacrifice, but because they believed survival sometimes required boldness greater than fear. In their hearts, they carried the weight of every world the Varek had destroyed, every ally who had fallen. They told themselves that if they failed, the galaxy would drown in darkness. If they succeeded, even for a short time, the enemy would bleed. The Council called it the most dangerous mission ever planned. The humans called it their duty. As the fleets moved into position, the galaxy held its breath. Few believed the humans would return, but many whispered that if anyone could strike such a blow, it would be them. The Varek marched forward, confident in their endless strength. They did not yet know that in the shadows behind their lines, a new storm was preparing to rise. And so, at the moment when defeat seemed certain, the galaxy watched humanity step forward with a plan that was bold, ruthless, and filled with the one thing the Varek could not understand: hope born from defiance. The humans launched their mission with a silence that felt heavier than any fleet ever gathered. There were no grand speeches, no promises of easy victory. Every soldier, every pilot, every commander knew the truth: this was a strike from which many would not return. Yet not one of them stepped back. They moved with quiet determination, as if the weight of the entire galaxy rested on their shoulders. The plan was clear. Instead of clashing directly with the enormous Varek armadas, the humans would slip behind their lines and strike the supply hubs that fed the enemy fleets. Without fuel, weapons, and food, the Varek war machine would falter. But reaching those hubs meant flying through heavily guarded sectors, moving across space watched by countless patrols. A single mistake could reveal the mission and bring doom before a single shot was fired. The first stage of the plan began with deception. Human ships scattered across the front lines, pretending to prepare for ordinary battles. Some even engaged in small skirmishes, drawing the Varek's attention. Meanwhile, hidden convoys of strike ships moved through secret routes, disguised by clever tricks of technology and daring navigation. Pilots flew dangerously close to stars and asteroid fields, using natural cover to hide from sensors. When the first human strike team reached its target, the Varek were unprepared. The hub was a massive station orbiting a barren world, filled with warehouses and fuel tanks. The defenders believed themselves safe, far behind the front lines. Then, in the middle of the night cycle, alarms blared as human soldiers stormed the base. Explosions ripped through storage tanks, and fire spread across docking bays. By the time the defenders organized, the humans had already planted charges across critical systems. Moments later, the entire hub was in flames, its supplies lost. The shock rippled through the enemy ranks. For centuries, the Varek had believed their supply lines untouchable. Now one of their most important hubs was gone in a single night. Their admirals dismissed it as luck, an isolated incident. But before they could recover, another hub was attacked. Then another. Human squads struck like lightning, vanishing before the enemy could trap them. Each strike carried enormous risk. Human soldiers knew that discovery meant certain death, but they pressed forward anyway. On one raid, a squad of Marines became surrounded inside a supply depot. Instead of surrendering, they fought to hold the enemy back while their comrades finished planting explosives. Their last transmissions carried only 2 words: mission complete. When the depot exploded, the Varek lost enough resources to fuel an entire fleet. Stories of such sacrifices spread quickly across the Alliance. Soldiers of other species, once hopeless, now spoke with pride when fighting beside humans. They saw that these newcomers were willing to pay any price to hurt the enemy. That courage was infectious. Slowly, the Alliance began to believe in the plan. The Varek grew frustrated. Their fleets were powerful, but without steady supply, they began to stumble. Warships drifted low on fuel. Armies on the front waited for shipments that never arrived. Communications grew strained as humans sabotaged relay stations and destroyed cargo convoys. The empire that had once seemed endless now showed cracks. What shocked the Varek most was how unpredictable the humans were. Their attacks did not follow any pattern. One day they struck at a fuel station deep in enemy space. The next day they appeared at a communications hub on the other side of the sector. Their commanders seemed to think like no other species, using chaos as a weapon. The more the Varek tried to anticipate their moves, the more they failed. The humans were not careless, however. Every risk was weighed, every action chosen to cause the greatest disruption with the fewest resources. Their experience came not from advanced technology but from their long history of struggle on Earth. Humanity had fought wars for survival long before they reached the stars, and those lessons now gave them an edge that no enemy expected. The Alliance Council received reports of these strikes with growing astonishment. They had doubted the human plan, calling it madness. Now they saw results too clear to ignore. The Vayrek were slowing, their fleets no longer as steady or unstoppable as before. For the first time in years, the balance of the war shifted. On the front lines, soldiers of many species began to fight with new spirit. They no longer looked at the Vayrek as invincible. They had seen their great empire bleed, and they knew who had drawn the first wounds. In their camps, soldiers spoke the same phrase again and again: follow the humans. To the humans themselves, these victories were not cause for celebration. They counted the cost of every raid, remembering the names of those who never returned. They carried that weight quietly, pushing forward because they knew the war demanded it. For them, it was not glory but survival, not honor but duty. The Vayrek, however, saw it differently. They began to fear these soldiers who fought with such fire. To them, humans were no longer shadows. They were storms, unpredictable and devastating, striking from nowhere and leaving ruin behind. Admirals whispered warnings to their fleets: do not underestimate them. In the galaxy's long history of wars, many species had risen and fallen. But never before had such a young and small civilization turned the tide of a conflict so vast. Humanity had shown that power was not only in numbers or weapons. True power was in the will to fight when all reason said defeat was certain. And though the humans had only begun their campaign, the Vayrek already felt the truth: they were no longer fighting an alliance they could crush. They were fighting humanity's ruthless resolve. The moment had come when the alliance prepared for its final desperate defense. The Vayrek fleet, vast and merciless, appeared at the borders of the core systems. Ships of every size moved like dark shadows across the stars, ready to crush the last remaining resistance. Every planet in the alliance watched with fear. Civilians hid in shelters, soldiers tightened their ranks, and commanders whispered prayers they had long abandoned. Nothing in the galaxy had ever seemed so unstoppable. The alliance forces were outnumbered, outgunned, and exhausted. Months of human raids had slowed the enemy, but the Vayrek had recovered enough to bring their full strength to bear. The core worlds were prepared as best they could be, but all calculations pointed to disaster. The Council of Worlds faced the same impossible question that had haunted them for years: how could anyone survive the wrath of the Vayrek? Yet in the midst of despair, the human fleets moved with quiet confidence. Their strategy was simple but daring. They had weakened the enemy supply lines and scattered their fleets across distant sectors. Now they would strike at the heart of the Vayrek advance, hitting key formations before the enemy could organize a perfect attack. Humans did not wait for the ideal moment, because the ideal moment would never come. Instead, they created it. When the battle began, chaos filled the stars. Vayrek fleets surged forward, expecting easy victory, but they were met by an unexpected counterattack. Human strike teams appeared from seemingly nowhere, cutting into the edges of the formation. Explosions lit up the void as supply ships were destroyed and smaller warships disabled. In many cases, entire Vayrek squadrons fell before the main fleet could react. Human pilots flew through enemy fire with precision that seemed impossible. They dodged missiles, slipped past defensive turrets, and used the smallest openings in enemy formations to deliver devastating attacks. Their ships were not the strongest, but the pilots used every advantage, every shadow, and every trick to maximize their impact. On the ground, human soldiers performed equally remarkable feats. They landed behind enemy lines, sabotaging command stations and cutting communications. Entire divisions of Vayrek soldiers became trapped, unable to coordinate or receive orders. Each human unit operated with discipline and cunning, moving in ways the Vayrek had never seen. The Alliance forces, once ready to give up, began to see the tide turn. Other species watched as human squads held positions that should have been overrun. Soldiers who had expected defeat were now inspired to fight with renewed energy. They realized that the humans had not only slowed the Vayrek, they were forcing them to fight on terms the enemy could not control. Even the Vayrek, with all their power, began to falter. Their admirals shouted orders that were impossible to enforce. Fleets that had once been coordinated and precise now drifted into confusion. Supply shortages made their weapons less effective, and scattered strikes by human forces cut their lines further. The confidence that had carried them across the galaxy for centuries began to crumble. In one critical moment, a massive Vayrek flagship attempted to lead an attack on a core world. Human pilots, having anticipated the move, executed a daring assault. Small teams infiltrated the ship, disabled critical systems, and planted explosives. Moments later, the flagship exploded in a brilliant fire that illuminated the surrounding battle. Vayrek soldiers, seeing their command center destroyed, faltered in morale. This victory was not simply a result of superior firepower. It was a product of the humans' refusal to surrender, their understanding of strategy, and their ability to think where others could not. They moved as a single unit, coordinating attacks across space and planets with a precision that surprised even the Alliance's most experienced commanders. As the battle continued, the Vayrek fleet began to retreat. Ships that had been unstoppable in previous campaigns now fell back, disorganized and low on resources. The humans had done what no one else could. They had taken a war that seemed hopeless and forced the impossible to happen. Across the Alliance, celebrations were muted but heartfelt. For the first time in generations, the enemy's advance had been stopped. Lives that would have been lost were now saved, and planets that had faced destruction could breathe again. The humans did not claim glory, they quietly returned to their positions, ready to continue the fight if necessary. The galaxy had learned something vital. Power was not only measured by size, numbers, or technology. True power came from determination, courage, and the unwillingness to accept defeat. Humanity had proven that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the tide of war could be turned by those who refused to yield. And so, when the Vayrek retreated, the Alliance realized that the impossible had become possible. Humanity, with its relentless soldiers and fearless commanders, had achieved what the galaxy had long thought could not be done. The war was not yet over, but for the first time, victory seemed within reach. The war had stretched across countless worlds and years, leaving scars on the galaxy that could not be forgotten. Entire civilizations had been broken, fleets reduced to ashes, and planets left uninhabitable. For generations, the Vayrek had ruled the stars with an iron grip, their empire seeming unstoppable. Yet now, after the daring raids, the supply strikes, and the final desperate battles, the Vayrek were retreating. The galaxy, for the first time in decades, had hope. On the core worlds of the Alliance, people emerged from shelters, stepping into streets scarred by war. Soldiers lowered their weapons, and citizens hugged one another with relief they had long forgotten. Yet amid the celebration, there was quiet recognition that none of this would have been possible without a single species. Humanity had changed the course of the war. They had faced impossible odds, struck deep into enemy lines, and refused to surrender when all logic said defeat was certain. The Alliance leaders convened to honor those who had fought. They praised many brave soldiers and commanders from all species, but the eyes of the Council often lingered on the humans. They had done what no one else could. They had taken a situation that seemed hopeless and carved a path to victory. Their courage, their cleverness, and their refusal to yield had made the difference. Human soldiers did not seek recognition. Many had lost comrades, friends, and even family in the campaigns. They carried the memory of every fallen ally quietly, without complaint. Yet their actions had inspired everyone around them. Where other species had grown weary and fearful, humans had brought hope that was tangible, alive, and unstoppable. Across the galaxy, stories of humanity spread quickly. On every world that had been touched by war, people told tales of soldiers who moved like shadows, striking in places no one expected. They spoke of pilots who flew through impossible conditions to disable enemy fleets and marines who never abandoned an ally, no matter the danger. In every story, humans were not merely soldiers. They were symbols of what could be achieved when determination outweighed fear. Even the Vayrek could not forget them. Their commanders whispered warnings and stories of the humans' ruthlessness, calling them a force that could not be predicted. No strategy had worked against them for long. No calculation could measure their willingness to fight. Where the Vayrek had relied on numbers, discipline, and technology, the humans had relied on something deeper: the refusal to surrender, the courage to face impossible odds, and the relentless drive to protect life and freedom. The humans themselves returned to their positions quietly, without celebration. They repaired ships, trained new recruits, and prepared for the possibility that the war was not yet fully over. For them, the victory was not personal glory. It was the survival of countless lives, the preservation of planets, and the hope that others might now stand free. They had learned from their own history on Earth that wars were not won by luck or chance, but by steady courage and determination. Among the Alliance, many soldiers and civilians felt a deep respect for humanity. They had seen what a single species could achieve when they refused to yield. It was no longer just a question of technology, numbers, or age of civilization. The galaxy understood that power could come from spirit, from unity, and from the courage to act when all others hesitated. As the last Vayrek fleets retreated, the Alliance began to rebuild. Damaged planets were restored, trade routes reopened, and communities that had suffered under constant fear began to thrive again. Yet the story of the humans was told at every gathering, every campfire, and every classroom. Children learned of the soldiers who had faced impossible odds and turned defeat into hope. Adults remembered the courage that had saved millions. Every species in the Alliance carried a new lesson: no matter how strong the enemy, courage and determination could change the outcome. The humans had left a legacy that went beyond battles. They had shown that survival was not determined only by strength but by the willingness to act when hope seemed lost. Their strategy, their bravery, and their unwavering spirit had reshaped the war and inspired the galaxy to believe again. They had turned the impossible into reality, and in doing so, they had rewritten the history of the stars. For the Vayrek, the lesson was harsh. They had met a species that refused to break, refused to retreat, and refused to accept what others had called inevitable. Their retreat was not just a tactical loss, it was a moment of revelation. Even the greatest power could falter when faced with courage that would not bend. The galaxy looked at humanity with awe, respect, and quiet gratitude. The humans had done what seemed impossible. They had faced an enemy that had crushed countless worlds and emerged as a force that could not be ignored. Victory had been impossible, yet humanity had made it real. And so, the stars were no longer the same. The memory of humanity's relentless soldiers remained, a symbol of hope and courage for generations to come. The Alliance had survived, the Vayrek had been stopped, and the galaxy had learned an enduring truth. When defeat seems certain, when hope is almost gone, it is the courage to fight, the refusal to surrender, and the determination to act that can turn the tide. Humanity had done exactly that, and the galaxy would never forget.